Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and dear audience. On behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, I welcome you all to today's 17th episode of webinar series. Today, we are going to talk about evolving right-wing and neo-Nazi movements in North America, a perspective. Dear audience, you'll be very glad to know we are joined by two of the leading experts on these topics in whole North America, actually. And we are very thankful for their time and consent to participate in today's discussion. With us also Dr. Hilal Mahiuddin, Director Research and Communication of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute. Before we begin, traditionally we acknowledge our treaty. And Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada is located on original lands of Anishinaabe Cree, Oji Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of Métis nations. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, I will just briefly set the context for today's discussion. And let me begin with what extremism actually means, and it leads to right wing and neo Nazi movements. I will straightway refer to Anti Defamation League's definition, as it says it's a concept used to describe religious, social, or political belief system that exists substantially outside of mainstream belief systems more broadly accepted in this society. Extreme ideologies often seek radical changes in the nature of government, religion, or society. Extremism can also be used to refer to the radical wings of broader movements such as anti-abortion movement or the environmental movement as well. Southern Poverty Law Center, a leading think tank based out of United States of America, also defines alternate right as which is commonly known as alt-right, is a set of far-right ideologies, groups, and individuals whose core belief is that white identity is under attack by multicultural forces using political correctness, social justice to undermine white people and their civilization. Alternate right is characterized by heavy use of social media and online memes. Alt-righters eschew establishment conservatism, skew young, and embrace white ethno-nationalism as a fundamental value. In one of their own words, the way they define is, I quote, the new left doctrine of racial struggle in favor of non whites only, a product of decolonization and the defeat of nationalists by egalitarians after the Second World War, must be repudiated, and whites must be allowed to take their own side in the affairs. A value system what says whites are not allowed to have collective interest while literally every other identity group can do so and ought to do so is unacceptable, unquote. And this is taken from the Fight for the Alt-Right, the Rising Tide of Ideological Autism Against Big Tent Supremacy in January 2016. So, what makes up the alt right groups? The alt right is an extremely loose movement made up of different strands of people connected to white supremacy. One body of adherents is the ostensibly intellectual racist who create many of the doctrines and principles of the white supremacist movement. They seek to attract young, educated white to the movement by highlighting the achievements and alleged intellectual and cultural superiority of the whites. Now let's focus what is happening in Canada. As I mentioned in the beginning of our session, that we have the leading expert in Canada, Professor Dr. Barbara Perry. So she co-authored a book with Professor Ryan Scavens very recently, and the book comprehensively examines right-wing extremism in Canada. It discussed the lengthy history of violence and distribution, ideological bases, actions, organizational capacity, and connectivity of these extremist group. And it draws on interviews with law enforcement officials, community activists, and current and former right-wing activists as well. The book is available in all the platform, and in the book, the professor and her co-author identified three types of right-wing extremism in Canada. And these are white supremacist, neo-Nazi, and racist skinhead, anti-authority communities, ideologues, gurus, and lone actors, and found approximately 100 groups. However, this figure doesn't include lone actors or those who are below the radar. They found violence was sporadic, unplanned, and opportunistic, and largely committed by small groups or individuals. And most importantly, the current wave of neo-Nazi movement and the group, the base of which most of you are aware, and Winnipeg and Manitoba also had a key person who was finally arrested in USA. This kind of movement is ongoing in many of the places in North America. And I'll just quickly also refer to the number of cases that were detected very recently in the Canadian Armed Forces. And one of is Patrick Matthews of the base neo-Nazi group. And CBC reports that the military's counterintelligence branch took a closer look at a pair of Canadian Rangers just last week, and they belong to some of the far right organizations. And one of the key persons CBC reported is Eric Migland and his spouse Jody Migland, and they all belong to Fourth Ranger Group, based out of Belmont, British Columbia. And also from Winnipeg, a retired reservist, Corey Hurren, who is a 46 years old Canadian Armed Forces member who smashed his truck in Rideau Hall in the beginning of July. So these are all kind of very troubling trends that we see. And very recently, Canadian military has created a new hateful conduct policy, which has kind of outlined how to deal with these groups. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the brief backdrop of the situation that we all are watching or going through at this point in time. And at this point, let me introduce Professor Barbara Perry. She's a professor and director of Center on Hate, Bias, and Extremism. It is based out of Ontario Tech Social Science and Humanities. And she has written extensively in the area of hate crime and right wing extremism. She has three books so far written on this topic. These are namely In the Name of Hate, Understanding Hate Crimes, Hate and Bias Crime Reader, The Silent Victims, Hate Crimes Against Native Americans. And she has also written on policing diverse communities, including work on social control in Native American communities. And we also have with us Brad Galloway, and Brad is basically I'm just reading his bio here, was a fixture in the North American right wing extremist movement for 13 years and was the president of a racist skinhead gang for 5 of those years. It is these lived experiences that play a role in his work in combating violent extremism. Brad now works as a case manager and research analyst with Life After Hate, where he helps others leave violent extremism and works on various research projects. In addition to his work with Life After Hate, Brad is also a research and intervention specialist at the Organization for Prevention of Violence and is a fourth year undergraduate student in criminology and criminal justice at the University of Fraser Valley. He is a research assistant on a number of projects that are funded by Public Safety Canada and the Canadian Network for Research on Terrorism, Security and Society. Brad has also served as a consultant for Google, Moonshot CVE, and the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, amongst others. His primary research interests include right wing extremism and terrorism, preventing and countering violent extremism, and the roles of former extremists in combating violent extremism. So, dear audience, you have this brilliant panelist with us today, and they're going to talk on their respective subjects. So, we'll go in the order. We'll welcome Professor Dr. Barbara Perry to speak first, and followed by Brad Galloway. Professor Dr. Barbara Perry, floor is yours. Unmute the mic. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Kaiser. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for that really generous introduction. Really happy to be here and to share some of what we've been thinking about over the past few years, actually. I'm going to steal some of Brad's thunder and make an announcement here that there will soon be a new line to add to his CV. We have just hired him as the coordinator for the Center on Hate, Bias, and Extremism, and in particular, the Facebook-funded Global Network on Hate. So he'll be joining our team in a more permanent role. He's been my research assistant for some time on several different projects. So now he will be a permanent fixture with the center. So really excited about that. So Brad and I go back quite a long ways in terms of the research that we shared, and he's been a great influence on the work that we've done. So we've sort of divided the labor here tonight. I want to talk a little bit about the work that we do at the center, and then end with just a really brief overview of why it is right now in this moment, in the context of COVID, that we're seeing quite a dramatic spike in hate crime and far-right activity online and offline. So I'm going to try and share the screen now and see what happens there. Is that working?
Not yet, Professor. It should come up here, and I can add.
Oops. Is the screen up?
No, not yet, Professor. Have you shared already?
I did, yeah.
No, I don't see it here.
Okay. No, it's not highlighting. Let me try again. It's not highlighting the share.
Or alternatively, you can send me the file and I can pop it up if you want.
Okay, I can do that. And while that's coming through, I can just speak a little bit about the center, which was established in spring of 2018 here at Ontario Tech University. It's something that I had certainly wanted to develop for quite some time. I thought there was a real need for it in the Canadian context. You know, we have some research centers, one in the UK, one in the US, around hate and extremism, but we didn't have anything similar in Canada. So I certainly thought it was time for that, given what we've seen in terms of spikes of far-right activity, as well as spikes in hate crime in recent years that have been quite dramatic. So sending that your way now. So we established the center in 2018 here at the university, and it'll come up in a moment, but I'll read you the mission statement. Advance awareness, understanding, and prevention of hate, bias, and extremism by providing research that will inform evidence-based policies and practices to promote a just and equitable society for all. So as that suggests, you know, we're very interested, obviously, in the research component, and that is certainly what occupies the bulk of our time. But you know, our intent is also to ensure that that research doesn't simply sit, you know, on a shelf somewhere, and it's only you know, we academics that share it, but that it's actually put to work. So there are additional pillars, if you will, to the work that we do. So research at the core, but also then sorts of things like that we're doing here, right? Promoting community awareness and stakeholder awareness of patterns associated with hate in all its guises. Whether we're talking about, you know, one of our colleagues does some work around stereotypes against people who've been wrongfully convicted. So, you know, bias in its many guises, hate in its many guises, and of course the extremism. So helping the general public to understand sort of the patterns of systemic racism, individualized forms of racism, hate crime, extremism, all of those pieces. Helping to inform stakeholders so that they can develop stronger policy, whether that's government stakeholders or educators or the labor movement, for example, who are really important, I think, in resisting and challenging hate in its many guises. So we work with community partners doing workshops and education of different sorts. And then the third pillar is even more pragmatic, and that is engaging with those same stakeholders to develop programs, to develop interventions countering hate. And I think once Brad comes on board at the center in particular, that's really going to facilitate those connections and networks that we're interested in building, so that again we can use our knowledge and our awareness to inform interventions intended to counter some of the patterns that we've unpacked. So, for example, right now I'm working on a proposal with John Howard Society in Ottawa and Yorktown Family Services in Toronto, some law enforcement agencies to develop gaming programs and safe gaming curriculum that challenges what we're seeing in so many gaming forums online right now, attempting to lure youth in particular into the culture through those gaming platforms, the chat rooms and those sorts of interactive pieces of it. So I think really important to stress that it's research is important. It's sort of our bread and butter, but it's research with a purpose, in that we're really engaged in the other two elements of the sample as well. Were you able to get the screen up? Oh, so you've gone to our website. Okay, that's good too. Let me just try one more time here. Oh, okay, it's highlighted. I think I can do it this time. Yes, there we go. Is that me doing that? Yes. Okay. Oh, this is a very different platform. Okay. Okay, now I've got it. Right, so I just wanted to share with you, coming back to that first pillar, share with you some of the projects that we currently have on the go. You can see that they are both related to hate crime, targeting particular communities, but also right-wing extremism specifically. One looking at misogyny in the movement, one looking at anti-Semitic hate crime, another looking at Islamophobic hate crime. One we're just finishing now looks at policing hate crime in Canada, actually specifically in Ontario. That's a pilot study. Excuse me. And we currently have two projects with DND, Department of National Defense, looking at both the policies revolving around hateful conduct and right-wing extremism in the military, and the extent to which they are useful or being used in that context, but also a larger project looking at trying to unpack the extent and the breadth and the nature of hateful conduct and right-wing extremism within the Canadian Armed Forces. So the first project of its kind in Canada, and we're very excited about that one. The other one, and this is one that we're in the midst of right now, so the DND ones are just getting off the ground. This last one is an update of the study that's reflected in the book that Kaiser mentioned at the outset. So this is an update, and I should say expansion of that initial project, looking at the far right across the country. So we do have people now. We have a large team. Previously it was Ryan and I. Now we have a much larger team that includes Brad and other colleagues from down east to out west. So a much more intensive project. So sort of watch this space, watch the center for materials coming out of that. So that's just a little bit about the center and how we're situated here. As I said, I just want to say just a few words about what the context is, why it is that we're seeing such a spike in violence and negative sentiments directed towards particular communities and I should say individuals and the state in the context of COVID. Some of this is associated with the extreme right, and some of it is not. It's it's sort of random individuals. And I think the first thing to recognize is that there's nothing really new about the anti-Asian piece of this in particular. I mean, we have a very long history of racism directed towards the Asian community, going back to the late 1800s when they were invited, Chinese in particular, were invited to build our railroads, and then sort of became the targets of ire and antipathy amongst the broader population. And from that point on, they were faced with systemic racism in the form of the head tax and the exclusionary legislation, as well as violence on the street at the hands of individuals. Not Chinese, but Japanese, of course, were interned during the Second World War, and so it goes on. And we see it pop up in different ways. So if we look at in the context of COVID, we're seeing that scapegoating. We're seeing those conspiracy theories and those very old narratives about Asians and the risk they pose in a different guise through both the political mainstream and the political or social extreme. So grounded in the conspiracy theories that, and I should say, it's not just Asians that are being targeted, and it's not just Chinese Asians either. Anyone who appears to be from the Far East is thought to be Chinese and therefore are vulnerable to targeting. But there's also a dramatic increase in sentiment and other forms of targeting towards the Jewish community. So anti-Semitic sentiment and violence is increasing as well. And that is also down to some of these conspiracy theories, right? If it's not the Chinese who are responsible, it's the Jews who are responsible, or perhaps they're in collusion and they're working together. But in some way, these communities are held responsible for the worldwide spread, or alternatively, for creating a hoax, for the misinformation that there is such a thing and that we are at risk. So even the anti-masker movement, says, claims that this is a hoax constructed by, again, either the Asians or the Jews or the state, the deep state, who are attempting to control our every movement. And this is just part of the slippery slope. So all those sentiments come back to haunt us. And I say in the extreme, but these comments that are to my right, your left, is that right? No, they're probably your side as well. These are statements made by Donald Trump, right? The president of what has been arguably the most powerful country on earth, and has a lot of cultural sway in terms of defining the terms of debate. So to see the kind of language that he has used consistently against the Asian community, it feeds into those narratives. We also have the incredible power of the internet playing into this, and for 20 years, certainly for the last decade, the far right in particular has lived online. There's still a lot, as Brad will tell you, a lot of offline recruitment and activity, but much of their strategizing, their coalition building, their recruitment is taking place online. And in the context of COVID, that is certainly where they're spreading those conspiracy theories, where they are sharing their narratives. Excuse me, sharing their narrative. Sorry, I'm getting dry and I didn't get a glass of water. Sharing their narratives. And we're also more of us are at home, so there's a larger audience as well. Excuse me. Excuse me. So you can just see a few of these trends coming up here in these slides. And you can look at the report that we recently released at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue around the far right use of the net. And we were beginning to see some of this already in 2019, which was the scope of that particular report. Excuse me, but we'll be reporting more on that because we've really seen spikes, obviously, excuse me, in May and June around these kinds of messages. You've got to add to that the economic dislocation. There are real concerns. There are real anxieties. There are real fears that people are losing their jobs, as you see here, how the unemployment rate has spiked, obviously. The net losses in jobs in April, nearly 2 million jobs lost in 1 month alone. We don't know how many of those jobs are coming back. Some of them never will. We don't know how many businesses we've lost who shut down, may not ever come back. So there's that real anxiety that is also exploitable by the far right and helps, again, to sort of provide the foundation, the legitimation for scapegoating others and othering and, you know, engaging in violence against them because they're to blame for our pain. And then associated with that, of course, is also the social dislocation. So, you know, we're working at home. You know, we're starting to probably, unfortunately, get out of the house again, and we're socializing. But for 3 months, right, we were really cloistered. Most of us, except those brave frontline workers, those, you know, grocery cashiers, those PSWs, you know, those medical personnel. Most of us were shut away in our rooms, in our small condos, perhaps, or you know, for those of us that were lucky enough to have a backyard and a garden, you know, but still very much confined. So that social dislocation is also a source of anxiety that's exploitable by the far right. And so they're using it very effectively. I could talk, you know, easily for several more hours, and certainly even just about this piece, which is responding. And I think that the bottom line here is education and deconstructing those narratives. So what's really important is countering online hate, countering those narratives, that disinformation and misinformation that is so readily available online. And a big part of that for adults as well as youth is enhancing critical digital literacy. We're not very good at critically assessing the sources that we're reading, the narratives that we're reading, the memes, what those memes mean, even, you know, especially the cartoonish ones, right? They just seem like a lark. There's something funny. They're comical. They're not. They have a much more serious and much more sinister message than that. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area to inform ourselves and to inform others as well how to read some of those pieces. So a whole array of interventions necessary here. And I'll stop there. Brad, I think, is going to talk a little bit more about some of the trends that we're seeing coming out of the current project on far-right extremism. So I thank you for that and look forward to questions and conversation as we move forward.
Thank you very much, Professor. So now we welcome Brad to share his ideas and experiences and his research projects with us. Brad, floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you again for for the invite here today. I really appreciate that, and also, of course, to come here to speak about some of these obviously emerging trends, and obviously these are issues that you know, Canada is facing. So that's one of the things that I think over the past little while we've really realized that a lot of this stuff has not only been hiding in the shadows, but is very real and it's very present, and that we like Barb was saying, we need to figure out, and we can talk at great length about what those responses might be. So a lot of the research has been about that. So a little bit about what I do and how those things inform some of the research, and then I'll jump into what I think and what we think are some of the emerging trends surrounding these things. Some of my direct experiences help me to understand what's going on out there. So I spent about 13 years in the far right, but it's I also have to continue to educate myself about today's world of violent far right extremism, which we're looking at. And as Barb was saying, there's a lot of old things that we recognize and old conspiracy theories, but there's a lot of this new as well, that these groups are sort of reframing and re-emerging as something else. So a lot of my work has been about that and how to like understand identities of far right people and online specifically. So some of my work with Ryan Scrivens has been about looking at the creation of the online identity and how that works and how that translates to offline violence and offline far right adherence and how they're working in our different communities across Canada, which that's definitely some interesting research that's led me down some different other pathways, which I've worked on with Dr. Perry as well, which was more about the music, and which is a recruitment tool for a lot of these far right groups. So we looked at on a TSAS project. We looked at specifically focusing in on country Western music, things like that, and how that works from my perspective is when you look at recruitment in today, we look at how can these conspiracies adapt to the general public, and that's what these groups continually try to do, continue to try to create nuances within their recruitment tactics to grab normal people and sort of feed into their what would appear like a real grievance, and then padding it with these conspiracy theories, right? So that's a lot of what in the online sphere, what I've been looking at, how they're trying to send people down different wormholes, whether it's over Facebook or whether it's on YouTube or whether it's on any type of social media. These groups are just seem to be one step ahead. So I believe that one of our challenges is trying to catch up to a lot of their activities in the online sphere. So that's been a lot of my focus in my research, trying to look at the online elements of that. So I guess that's like more to like, what can we do? That is the question of like the response mechanisms of how we can look at these things. And I think Barb brought up one of the most important things was education, and especially surrounding the digital literacy and media literacy and things like this, because how do we tell people what this is all about without educating ourselves first, and also the practitioners. So in my field, it's elemental that we know how these people are acting online, especially when I'm providing intervention services and helping people leave. I need to know what these groups are about, how they act online, what they, are they using apps? Are they also using social media? How are they connecting those things together? These types of things, it's a continual education process for us, and it's a continual education process that we need to be doing in communities too, in order to enable them to have the resources to be able to work within. We have all these different agencies that are working with youth and working with other, also vulnerable communities. We look at how do we prepare them for some of these things that are going to be there, of course. In my work, we also look at victims of hate crimes and hate incidents and things like that. Like, how do we? Families often reach out. Like, what can we do to help our community restore itself after these things happen too? So that type of outreach, I believe, is definitely a key factor in the response column of like what we need to be doing to prepare ourselves to help out in these communities after these unfortunate incidents happen. And further, looking at in today's direct world, the pandemic and platforming that hate is like so connected to the emerging trends, which I'll go through that quick here. And then I'm going to loop back and talk a little more about how I think COVID-19 in itself, and also the civil unrest that we're seeing right now, is directly connected to how these different groups, no matter which types, from Proud Boys to accelerationists, and how they all play different roles in using these different platforms to move their thing forward. So some of the emerging trends that we see, I guess, in the research. We're noticing that there's a significant growth in numbers. I mean, that's a big thing across Canada. We see these groups and inhabiting provinces, and those numbers are going up. They're not going down. And it's various types of groups that we're looking at. Everything from your typical old sort of neo-Nazi skinhead type of group to these, I think, ideologues, gurus. Sorry, my thing just turned off here. That's coming back on. To these militia groups, and of course to something that was mentioned at the beginning, was like the base and these accelerationist groups, Atomwaffen, those types of groups. I mean, it's very important that we recognize which types of groups are out there and what they're doing. However, collectively, they're looking for the same goal. And they all play a role, at least in my opinion, and through this research, they all play a role in the building of more vast and strengthening the far-right movement in general in Canada. So we look back, and I like to comment on this for a second. When we look at new chapters or new things that happen, so we had Blood and Honor, who was recently added to our terrorist list here in Canada, and we say, oh yeah, we got him. And then I say, well, that was perhaps 25 years too late, or 10 years too late, or whatever number you want to use, but it was too late. And at this point, and we say, okay, well, did we get them? No. All these people are going to go off to other groups, and they're going to join the newer groups that are there, or they're going to still go under that guise of, that same type of neo-Nazi group, but they're going to just call it something else. So, provincially, it'll be whatever's, opportunistic to them. These guys also know that when law enforcement comes along, it's a good time to go underground. They have different ways of like acting in this sense to hide themselves. And I've noticed one of the areas that these guys sort of go off to is this like idyllic biker gang type of white supremacist group, whether it be Soldiers of Odin, Northern, this type of thing. They can very well hide themselves within those groups, and also behind the guise of like spiritual Odinist types of movements. They tend to go towards that kind of thing, and that's sort of like a placement for these guys, and they will start up new groups. But it's often these same guys, these same charismatic leaders, which some of the research that in past Mark Ham's research specifically talked about that, how these guys, they'll be that charismatic leader, and that one group will get shut down, but they're going to start up a new thing under the same sort of principles. So other examples are groups like Pegida, which is like often more like single issue type of group that looks at like anti-Islam, like focusing on specific issues rather than focusing across the board, like a Blood and Honor or like a Volksfront or Hammerskins. Like they would focus on more broader white supremacy. But these types of groups tend to try to say, well, we're not bad. It's the other that's bad. Here's what they do that's bad, but we're good. We're just giving information about how we're better, and they're, this is what they're doing wrong. So they're not coming necessarily from your typical hate-based ideology. It's more like they're saying, well, we're Judeo-Christians, and that's better. We're better because of that. And look at what these guys are doing wrong in their religion. So, us and them mentality. So when you go down to the deeper root of it, it is just that us and them, and they're just using one issue rather than a vast array of issues to deal with that. Specific, again, Proud Boys, newer type of group, more focused on this manosphere or men's rights, this type of movement. They say they're not white supremacists or they're not white nationalists, but when you look a little deeper, the charismatic leaders in their groups are all connected to white nationalism or white supremacy, and I don't ever take it seriously when they say, no, we're not. We're just here for men's rights, and we're just sticking up for the. And then when you dig a little deeper, you'll find out that they're connected to, often internationally, to violent far right groups. So, and they are super violent in themselves, and that's evident with some of the reports that we have. Soldiers of Odin, like I said, these biker style groups. They're from my perspective, I look at them as the sort of on the street attention seeking group that wants to just attract the attention to these issues, and then. They're not necessarily what's behind a lot of the super violent stuff, but they are definitely the divisive group that wants to say, we are here again, us and them, join us in the fight against, Islam, Sharia law. That's a lot of the stuff that comes up in their arguments. And often they try to hide behind this guise of, we are not a racist group because we have one black member or we have one Asian member, like this tokenism thing, which actually makes their narrative even worse by doing that, because this is just, it's very simple to see through all of that with the insignias that they're wearing, with the people that they're connected to. Of course, historically, they're connected to Blood and Honor in Europe. So this we obviously know as a hate group. So it's, I think partially what my job is also to get out there and educate in the sense from my perspective, from my experiences, but also from recognizing where these guys are trying to play it off as something that's just, simply trying to, promote their narrative as something that is not racist or hateful or trying to not, they're not trying to divide. They're just trying to say, like, educating on, these certain issues that are going on. And in actuality, it's just exactly what I was a part of. It's just trying to dumb it down enough so that they can, again, normalize it enough so that they can get people from regular society to buy into some of the narratives. Storm Alliance, Northern Guard, that's another one, similar to Soldiers of Odin. I feel like there's some also obsession almost with like militarization, or like them trying to build themselves in this like sort of brotherhood like bikers as well, and they often try to like promote that they're like pro law enforcement, but then when you actually talk to the members in the groups, they're all have a lot of them will have a criminal history and they hate cops. So it's kind of like they want to work with them, but they definitely inside the group, they want to work definitely as far away as from the police as they possibly can. But that's, again, one of their things that they promote. They're like promoting this law and order thing, and where Barb was tying in the Trump administration, and that's some of what this is. It's like they're like, oh, we're pro law and order, we're pro government, but then not so secretly within the group, they're not pro law and order, and they're not pro government within these groups. They're actually very anti-government and very anti-police. I mean, one of the main narratives while I was in these movements was never talk to cops. I believe it's referred to as the 5 words. So these guys, it's mostly BS when they say they support law enforcement. They just want to say that so they can, as we can visualize some of these protests, it honestly sometimes appears that they are acting beside the police. And in Europe, one of the most chilling situations that I saw recently was the military and police marching along with the violent far right groups. And this is to me an alliance that we can't just put off to the side. We need to look into that a lot further. And partially what these guys are trying to do by softening the image in some ways, and then obviously having violent wings, like if we look back to Blood and Honor's Combat 18, which was a violent wing of Blood and Honor. We look like today to this coalition building where you'll see the softer groups and going out and protesting and just saying, well, we're not violent, we're just here trying to present a message or whatever. But again, behind it all, violence is the output, and that's what they want. And that's where we talk about them being armed and dangerous. And this is not something that we can just overlook as something is, we take 3%ers for example. Often, these people have military training or previous law enforcement training. This is something we really need to note, as if these guys are gathering arms and gathering members and secretly training. I often put it out there of saying, if this was a person of color or a group of Muslims that were secretly training out in the woods with firearms, how would we be looking at that group? What would we be saying about that group? I think the narrative would be a lot different than the way we're treating these 3%ers and things like that. So I think there needs to be sort of systemic changes. I would say that's one of the responses that we can look at. Some of the cultural changes that we need to look at. Just in general in our communities, we need to stop accepting these guys. Oh, it's just a phase for the youth sort of hate groups that are attracting the younger people, and definitely for these types of groups that are armed and dangerous. I think we need to look at them from a different lens, where we need to be trying to educate people that this is a scary group, and they are out there recruiting people, and they are organizing. And why is it that for so long we just pass off these things without looking at them a little bit deeper? So that is the point of why we're trying to do research on this and try to figure out more about it and try to see what we can do about it in the long run. So that leaves me with this idea of the pandemic and platforming hate. That's what I call it, because I look back to the Yellow Vest movement in Canada, where there's a real grievance. Some of it, the people are anti-oil or pro-oil or whatever. Okay, you can be those things. That's fine. But these types of groups look for those types of things to platform themselves. So they'll say, let's go there and let's show up, and then they get on the news. Remember, they don't care about negative attention or positive attention. Any attention is good for them. They don't care about how that looks, because if they're seen marching with their patches down the street, that makes them, even if the blurb underneath is hate groups violently attack people, they don't care. They just love the fact that they've gotten some airplay. So we have to think about how we're platforming these groups too. And that's again, media getting out there and perhaps sometimes giving these people a platform. How can I not remember all the times Richard Spencer has been on TV and they're like, yeah, we just want to get your points. He was on CNN recently. I'm like, well, what is this person? You're giving them a platform to talk about white nationalism. There's a time where we need to just not give them that platform and not give them that space to promote hate and their groups. So during the pandemic, I've seen an uptick in these groups operating and new groups emerging, specifically online, because they know people are sitting back at home, anxious about things, wondering what's going on. Why is my government not doing anything? So they know people are already wound up about stuff. So this is the time, that they're trying to target these people, because they know that they're getting a broader audience. And specifically in my work at doing intervention work, it looks like this to me. I'm seeing your average 50s woman living at home, looking after things, do whatever doing, and we're getting referrals saying, "Oh, I don't know what I've come across. I'm now in QAnon. How do I get it?" These are real things that are happening, and it's your everyday person is getting involved in some of these conspiracy theory and these different movements that are going on, and this is very very interesting to me when I'm looking at this, because I see exactly that. How can we radicalize normal people? That's what these groups want. How do we get them from, okay, I'm not so sure about, this certain issue or how we're dealing with the pandemic. I don't like what our government's doing. And how do we get them through the door of the government is lying to us about this, or the CDC is lying. Look at a lot of these people in the United States with, following Trump and what's going on there, and where actual people who are medical professionals are being shunned by these groups. And that's what they do. They try to flood the internet with their narrative. So my operative thing here would be to flood it with the truth, which this is something that we need to be aware of, and give those instead of platforming these groups and giving these hate groups a platform, let's try to platform those agencies more to get out the real information. So yeah, we're dealing with a real problem with disinformation, and which is getting that person through the door, and they're having now a chance at being radicalized by, they would never have had this beforehand. And this is the unfortunate, when we're living in an unfortunate time with this pandemic, and a lot of us are anxious and not understanding what's happening. I think this is a great time for us to think and do more research and develop new best practices, and trying to figure out what we can do online and offline in that area. And it also kind of links to this idea of the overall conspiracy theory thing that's going on right now with a civil unrest too, with these tragedies that have been happening all across the United States, with police-involved murders, things like this happening to communities that are unfortunately not strangers to this type of activity throughout decades upon decades, and of this mistreatment by people of authority. And often what's used is like, oh, our rights are being taken away because guns are being limited access to firearms, things like this, where realistically we need to help these communities and help them build back after them being victimized so often. How do we develop new things to help these communities build themselves back after being victimized so much, and seeing these tragedies happen like this, and these groups almost using law enforcement to their advantage, using the media to their advantage, and we need to be the voices of reason and come along and figure out some new things, and to look at these issues a little bit closer, because I just don't think we're doing enough. And I know there's no right answer, but I know that these groups are out there using these specific things where people might have real grievances to create more civil unrest and more disconnection. And that's what, at the end of the day, the overarching group that I think is the scariest right now is the accelerationists, because they're sitting there saying, this is exactly what we want. It's the extreme left anarchists and the extreme right most violent people, and they're doing all of this different and this is the accelerationists are sitting at home going, oh, this is the theater we wanted. So are we going to continue to give them this theater, or are we going to figure out some ways that we can try to help put a stop to this? Because I think our societies are getting divided by this. Sorry for rambling, but it's a topic of interest. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
Thank you, Brad. I think we can go on hours listening, Brad. And I had the opportunity talking to him in 2017, and he was very kind enough to give me a research interview. And so, dear audience, we have just finished listening to two of our panelists here. Now I would welcome Dr. Hilal Mohiuddin. He teaches at one of the public universities, and I hope Dr. Hilal would shed some light on a different way of, I might term it as a non-Western type of radicalization and extremism, because he was one of the architects of a documentary which won a lot of awards, and I hope he's going to talk about it. And just so that you know, dear audience, we'll be airing his documentary on 20th of September, and it was shot in Bangladesh, a small South Asian nation. But there is a Canadian connection here, because some of you might be aware that on July 1st, 2016, there was a deadly terrorist attack in one of the upscale cafe in the capital city of Dhaka, where more than 23 foreigners lost their lives. And the perpetrator was a Canadian-born Bangladeshi, and who was radicalized. It is argued that possibly he was radicalized in Canada while he was in Canada. So he comes from Windsor, Ontario. So there is a connection, and Dr. Hilal had that documentary done. So possibly he would be talking about, I'm not sure. But Dr. Hilal, here you are. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Kausar. And thank you, Barbara and Brad. It was a very enlightening session indeed. I think the topic is so big and wide. We need to spend hours just to get good sense of the topic of discussion. And Dr. Kausar advised me, or I mean, advised me to focus mostly on non-Western contexts. Probably it would be difficult, quite difficult for all of us, because we can't really separate one context from the other. It is so connected and so intertwined all over the world. We can't separate it really. So I will focus on the topic in general. And there is another clarification. The movie that you were referring to was not documentary really, it was a feature film. So it had some stories built in there that how fundamentalism and religious extremisms are taking place in some countries. The main idea of that movie was something different, that okay, how we are perceiving. And today in this discussion, Barbara and Brad really brought out that discussion quite well. Like, okay, two things. We always care about two important things. That what can we do? What do we do in our society? We are looking for solutions. We know about problems from different perspectives, and there are different narratives as well. Just to downsize those big and wide narratives, to some extent, we need to use some reductionist viewpoint that okay, we need to get into the root cause analysis, and there we focus mostly on the solution side, that what can we do. And we see that there are two different tools. One is victim centric, victim sensitive. A lot of interventions are taking place all over the world, as Barbara was also talking about, engaging all the people like the law enforcement agencies, the militaries, the community groups, and then multicultural groups and faith groups. There's a lot of interfaith dialogues are also taking place. But actually, the question is whether we are getting really the expected outcome that we initially planned. It is going to be a big question. If you don't hear now, probably you'll be hearing this question after 2 or 3 years, that people will keep asking that, okay, a lot of things are going on and a lot of fundings are there. So this is one. It is victim-centric approach. And based on this victim-centric and victim-sensitive approach, we are designing our interventions. This is one side. So what about the offender-centric approach? Are we really comfortable with that? Are we going to jails? Are we going to different peoples and groups, underground peoples? We are going. Indeed, we are doing some risky jobs. Researchers are doing that. But we are not taking too much risk. And that's practical. That's pragmatic. We can't take really risk on our lives. So we are making a distance and we are trying to understand, but it is creating a huge gap, actually. Big gap. We are not getting their perspectives. It is not easy. I'm again and again, I am admitting that, okay, it's not easy and we should not risk our lives. It is not anything wise decision. So recently I wrote not recently, actually, over the last 2-3 years, I wrote a couple of op-eds, especially in Bengali newspapers, about one important aspect, that is fear. We are talking about biases, hates, and extremism for sure. But we are missing one important point. It is fear. It is institutionalizing all over the world. I am trying to write a book. I am collecting all the books. And the title of the book is also decided. It's a fear is our time zone, because it's so global. It is becoming the next pandemic. We don't see how fear is being instilled in everyone's personal to social spaces, even national and international spaces, like deep state. As Brad mentioned, that okay, we are seeing that ultra white groups or supremacist, some sort of supremacist groups are there, and police, law enforcement agencies, and others are around them, and they're marching together. There are some other sensitive issues like extrajudicial killings are taking place all over the world, not only in developing countries or in the countries that are under autocracy, but even so-called democratic worlds. These things are taking place, and people are being abducted. You don't know where they're going, and we don't get any trace of these people. So a lot of things are happening there. Not only that small groups or underground people or other extremist groups are actually creating creating problems or creating havoc for the society. We are getting into much deeper problem. And as you mentioned, I agree with Brad that, okay, there is a big uptake at this time, especially during the COVID period, because we are having time to utilize all the social media and internet resources. We are able to abuse them to the maximum extent we can. This is taking place these days. But the problem is that these internet facilities and other facilities will be there for the next, say, decades after decades, and it will be even uh, getting more developed form. And what can we do? Can we cope up with these problems in, like, okay, when government is not involved and there are different types of surveillances and there are deep state activities and other things, whether we would be getting support from them? These would be a very big questions at some point, and they are very sensitive things as well. Most of the time we try to avoid these questions to bring into our focus. So fear is one most important thing, I think, that when we are talking about extremism and the emergence of new groups, especially these days, we need to bring that perspective as well into our discussion. I am trying to write another paper as well, and all the documents are already prepared by now. I categorized 3 groups of people. One is, as you mentioned, exploitables. We can exploit them very easily. The other one is expendables. Like, there are people, you can kill them, like the Rohingyas, like others. Genocides are taking place horrendously, horribly. So this is a very big problem. So exploitables are very easy to understand, and it is researchable. We have a lot of tools to do that. And different intervention approaches are also helping us to get information, especially through different NGOs and other social or community development activists. We are also human rights activists. We are engaged in that. We know that, okay, exploitables, we can trace them easily. But what about the expendables? Whether we are talking a lot about the expendables. So I have written a couple of op-eds on that, about the expendables, that, okay, they are also increasing these days. People are being killed and people are not really resisting this type of activities. And in between them, there is a thin line, another group, and this is intimidables. I don't know whether you have seen that or not. There are everyone is getting victim to that. Like, okay, me, someone is calling to my home over telephone that, okay, CRA, Canadian Revenue Agency, you have committed this crime, that crime, police will come and law enforcement agency will be coming and will be bringing you to jail if you don't. Okay, so people are trying to exploit other people in a different way, and sometimes this is not really exploitation. We are getting intimidated by so many other forces, even by our neighbors, even by our gestures. So I think we need to bring considerable sociological, anthropological insights in extremism, bias, and hate discussion. I have gone through different literature, and they are astounding indeed. But sometimes I see the gap, that, okay, this is a big gap there, that, okay, we are not bringing in enough sociological and anthropological insights in extremism analysis. So just taking that problem into consideration, I am trying to write that paper. Probably it will be prepared in the next by 1 month. That, okay, 3 types of groups, how these 3 types of groups can be studied in extremism analysis and bias analysis. So that's it up to now. Just I have one small question to, it's a curiosity to Brad, whether there is really any extreme left group, as you are talking about divisiveness. I'm working about that as well. I know that extreme rights are there. There are some so-called anarchists. Sometimes I also get labeled because I am partly related with some kind of left sort of ideological political movements. Okay. But do you really see, to my understanding up to now, it is my observation that there is no such thing called extreme left. And it is a dying concept. Even left is a dying concept. So when you are saying extreme left, it is going to really create a big confusion that, okay, whether you can really divide 2 groups in terms of political ideologies, that extreme right and extreme left. So I would really request you to be very careful and to look at that with much greater attention, because it can be read very differently, and it can give us a completely broken sense or a distorted sense of the situation, because you cannot compare these two. Actually, there is no extreme left. It's my understanding up until now. Thank you very much, the presenters, for your wonderful presentation, and thank you, Dr. Kausar, to allow me to reflect on the topic and my thoughts as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I actually allow Brad to jump in here, so dear audience, we have just concluded our first part of the session today. We have heard panelists as well as comments from the observer. So now it is open for question and answer. So let me go with Dr. Helal's question. Brad, if you would like to comment on that, what about extreme left? And how do you see extreme left here? And then what I'll do is I'll pick some of the questions from that we have received from the audience. There are many audiences, those who have tuned in today, and I'll pick some of them and then I will wrap up. So Brad, if you kindly comment on extreme left things.
Okay, so I can clear it up pretty quickly here. So when I was speaking about the extreme left, often the narrative that we see out there in the media is that there are this Antifa, there's this extreme left, there is this thing that's there. Okay, so for me, it's violence begets violence. So because of my own sort of experiences with being in the far right and knowing going to these protests, and at one point that was me going to those things, and I saw some of this violence. So only people who label themselves as extreme right or extreme left, I guess, are in a sense, they are part of those groups. But I can tell you one thing: when I was inside of the movement, I did not say I'm an extreme right or I'm a white supremacist. I was a proud member of the group that I was in. That was it, right? So I do agree that there is there's a little bit of a misnomer. There's going to be the people that show up to bring violence to the extreme right. Now, are they extreme? I don't know. We don't really know. There is no such group, such organization really as Antifa, as far as I know. And that is even from 13 years spent in those groups. But I do know there were violent people who showed up who hated us when we were doing our protests. So that's what's being perceived as our media. That's what our media is saying, that, okay, there's a left and a right, because it's like we need someone to confirm those things for us. But I don't think it's like that. I think it's like, in reality, I think one of the memes that I see on the internet all the time is it's a barge, and it's World War II, and there's soldiers leaving it, and it says anti-fascists fighting, Nazis, right? And isn't that what our society is? Aren't we fighting off Nazism and hate? And I'd like to think that, right? So, to answer the question of extreme left, yes, in perception by media, that again, something that media is doing and making this seem like it's a huge war and all this kind of stuff. But that actually feeds into it. And the accelerationist community, they love that. They're sitting there going, well, look at this and look at that, and they're all fighting each other. That's feeding the whole narrative. What we need to do is say, violence is violence. So these violent people showed up. I don't know if they want to call themselves Antifa. I don't think Antifa would ever say, hey, we're Antifa and we're going to go do violence against the far right. That's not how that works. And I think without the neo-Nazi groups, without the white supremacists, without all these groups taking this hate and extremism to our communities, we would not get people showing up and wanting to get rid of these groups. I don't know we can't say, I've never met a person once throughout my whole time in the movement that said I'm a member of Antifa. It's ridiculous, because again, I think society is Antifa, right? Society are anti-fascist. We're against regimes that are trying to ruin liberal democracy. So I think I hope that sort of sheds a little more light on where I was going with that. I should have been a little more clear that I think a lot of these things are are projected by media and projected by also far right groups, and labeling something else to demonize the other again. And that's what it is. It's all us versus them mentality. That's the mentality that they love. They want to other. They want to create that, because without that they have nothing. They have no enemy, and their whole deal is to create an enemy and wipe out whatever enemy that is with violence. So yeah, there's going to be people that are really ticked off about these types of groups that are going out into our communities, and they become violent too. And of course, I condemn anything that is a criminal activity, but I doubt those things are all. It wouldn't be responsible to say it's all related back to some feeder group called Antifa. We can't confirm that. So yeah.
I just would like to jump in there, because the other challenge is that it's not just the media that has contributed to this construction. It's law enforcement as well. I've done now probably this round maybe 75, 80 interviews almost. Many of them with law enforcement, who are insistent that we pay attention to the left as well. I mean, any opposing force to them is part of this mass Antifa, which is, from their perspective, the extreme left. So they're playing into that narrative, and it's really difficult to pull them out of it. It was hard enough to get them to the table to recognize, that there is such a thing as, the white nationalist movement, and whatever label we want to apply there. But they insist on this false equivalency between an extreme right and an extreme left that is a boogeyman. Yeah, boogie person.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much. Because we already had a question on Antifa, and this is what is the question. I mean, the audience wants to know, how do you find these movements gaining traction? Is it post 2016 environment when these far right, alt right movements gain ground? I mean, do you see this organization exist? I mean, pre 2016. I mean, I'm saying 2016 because the election of in the south. So, did you find these groups actually on ground before 2016?
The anti-fascist
Yeah.
element. Yeah, well, and I think we can't really call them groups. They're collectives, right? They're random collectives of people, often different people coming together. And so Hamilton, for example, has had a lot of far right activity. Every Saturday, they're still having gatherings. I think they've moved. Someone said they moved from City Hall to the waterfront for the summer, and different groups and different individuals have come to counter them. So I think it's a movement. I don't think it's a series of groups. I think there are anti-fascist individuals, and there's a movement as well. But it wasn't something. I mean, we've had this. As long as there are fascists, there are going to be anti-fascists or anti-racists. And sort of whichever label you want to give them there. And I think even. And Brad, you can speak to this. I'm sure even in the 90s, when Heritage Front was at the fore, anti-fascist movement was alive and well then. And we do have, in most cities, there are websites, Antifa Toronto, Antifa Montreal, that sort of thing. But again, it's a gathering place for like-minded people, as opposed to any sort of even semblance of organized groups. But they're long-lived, right? They're long-lasting. They sort of, it's kind of like the far right in some respects. They're always sort of simmering there below the surface. And when opportunity is ripe, or when the need is ripe for anti-fascists, they emerge. Because as Brad says, right, I think there are more of us who cherish those ideals and those values of inclusion than the opposite.
Exactly. So this question is also important. Some of the audience wants to know whether far right have significant political influence coming into mainstream politics. I think I might add with the question that we have seen billboards coming up with the message from Maxime Bernier last time. So,
Mhm.
what do you think as experts? how do you see these things playing out in Canadian society?
Well, I think that they have political influence that can influence mainstream politics, but I don't think it will. They'll be very successful. They really haven't been, for the most part, that successful. Ontario and Alberta premiers excluded. Bernier was not very successful. I mean, yeah, it's all relative, right? I mean, in the last municipal elections here in Ontario, Faith Goldie, for example, garnered something like 24,000 votes, which is, a sizable number, but certainly not enough to put her in any threatening position of power. So yeah, I think that the movement can influence the narratives in mainstream politics, which is maybe even the greater fear, because it's that much more subtle than people, coming to the debates in, the black leather jackets with the patches.
Mm-hmm. Brad, do you want to add here?
Well, I can always say that gaining prominence in mainstream politics is a goal of the organized hate movement in Canada, for sure. Like, I mean, throughout the years, there's been several tries at this, whether it be, like Barb said, Faith Goldie, or whether it's this, I don't even want to mention the name of it, but they tried to make a party recently, and that was something not successful. The problem is that once you get these personas that are involved in the actual white nationalist groups, once they come to the surface, it turns out that they don't understand often that their closet gets emptied of all of their sort of dirty deeds. And then it's like, their criminal history can come up, their association with the KKK or whatever other group, like all of that stuff starts to come to the surface. And then anyone who might have voted for like anti-immigration stuff or like one of their party platforms, that all goes away once they realize that it's like, this person is, and again, it's Faith Goldie got quite a number of votes there, but like, yeah, that's still a fraction of what's needed to actually get into any office. So like I think it's a goal of theirs, but again, often they don't want to be part of mainstream politics. So we have to keep that in mind too. They think that this is all a guise under the Zionist operated government. They don't want to be part of that stuff. So they want to create their own ethno-state with their own politics. That's what so yeah, some of them will try to branch into mainstream, but that's a tough one. That's a tough one. And it seems to be failing over and over again, which is ideal, I think, in this sense. So.
I think as a pertinent question here, what do you see the similarities and dissimilarities of these groups? I mean, when I planned for this webinar, I also thought that how do you really distinguish these groups operating down in the South and in our country? I mean, because these are overlapping, right? I mean, the concepts, the groups have originated some in Europe, and then they were brought in the concept-wise, like Soldier of Odin and all. So do you, I mean, given your huge experience here, do you actually see similarities and dissimilarities?
That's yours, Brad.
There's definite similarities to the groups. I mean, there's overlapping groups like the way that Proud Boys do stuff in the U.S. is not going to be much different from the way they do it in Canada. There's distinctive similarities when we talk about neo-Nazi skinhead groups. They don't. I think there was a paper on this too. I think it was talked about porous borders at Barb. Yeah. So yeah, I think these groups don't care about international borders. They care about race, like especially if race is the main concept of their group. It's about building a racial group that has, we talk about the Pacific Northwest Imperative or like, the group that I was actually part of was Volksfront. They wanted to buy up land, and it wasn't like about conforming to whatever national or federal laws or whatever. It was more about creating their own ethno-state again and getting away from it. They didn't really care about whether it's Canada, US, Australia, Germany, whatever. It was really about whatever the constitution of the group was. And they all had like their separate sort of constitutions, which, not a lot of it looks at that kind of thing. Sometimes they'll have like stuff that is US centric. Like they'll say like, because of 2001, the 9/11 attacks, they'll say it's a prominent thing that we have to be anti-Islam. Like you have to adhere to that stuff because of what they did to America. But that's just one of the recruitment techniques to get people who aren't necessarily skinheads or anything like that. They just to give them here's a real grievance. Look, they attacked us, so you should be part of our movement, right? So that's often a recruitment tactic within their constitution. But outside of that, it's the border doesn't matter. They want to get as many ready and willing people involved in this as possible. As one of our other papers was about boots on the ground, it's getting these people offline. Recruiting them on whatever platforms they got online and getting them offline to go do the things that they see that need to be done in the communities, right? So yeah.
I think if there is a difference, it's around the violence, even the promotion of violence, even the rhetoric of violence. I think is slightly lesser in the Canadian context, and until recently, there wasn't as much fascination with arming themselves and gun rights and that sort of thing. We're starting to see a shift in that, though. We're seeing a lot more of that in the Canadian context too. So even the Proud Boys, I mean, one of their catchphrases is "We love our guns." That was a group that, to me, started as a bunch of overage frat boys, and so that they've devolved into sort of the promotion of violence. The imagery that we see with the 3%ers and Northern Guards, often with heavy arms, automatic weapons, and stockpiles of weapons, and the paramilitary training, all of that. That's a relatively new development for the Canadian movement.
So I'll just take last question from here because just to be conscious about time. So Professor, we are just wondering to know from your research experience and interaction with the Canadian law enforcement agencies, particularly military and police, and I know you have traveled extensively throughout the country over the past year. And so what is your feelings about what do you think about the extent of infiltration, the extent of radicalization amongst the members? Although we have some idea from the, I think it's done by SPLC, Southern Poverty Laws Center. There's a study they wanted to understand how far American police forces were being radicalized. So, if you want to share with the audience, will be very because it's coming up very quickly. I just referred yesterday, I think 2 days ago, CBC's coverage of 37 case and 2 rangers. So would you share your ideas with us?
Yeah, we law enforcement. We know absolutely nothing about that, short of what groups themselves have claimed to have, law enforcement in their membership. I think we're finding out a little bit more about the military engagement as we see these cases come to the fore, and that's really what our project is all about. Is really trying to unpack that. And as I said, we're just getting that off the ground. We haven't even hired our coordinator for that project yet, but I think that we're going to see it, I think, in 2 directions. That is that there are, especially in the reserves, where groups are encouraging members to join the reserve so that they get that modicum of training and access to arms and weaponry and all of that, and bringing that back to the group. We're also seeing, I guess maybe there's three ways. Then we're also seeing people who are in the service being mobilized from within, so other members within their troop, within their unit, who are trying to lure them into the movement, and that's a second connection. And I think the third, and maybe the more worrying, because it might be more common, is those who are coming out of the service and gravitating towards these movements because of that same, as many of them, like Lamut, for example, tried to model itself around the military in terms of ranks and discipline and order and all of that sort of thing. So to the extent that groups model themselves like that, they become an alternative for people coming out of the service looking for that same tradition. And the groups will exploit that, that real patriotism. I think that informs many service members, will exploit that and will pervert it into the worst kind of nationalism. So take the best kind of patriotism and pervert it into the worst kind of nationalism. And so I think there's those three dynamics that we're really going to be paying attention to.
Mhm. Thank you. Brad, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I got a couple of comments. So, I mean, it's historical, I think, within especially the more violent far-right groups, that they look for guys who have formal training with weapons or formal training in the military specifically. And it was actually encouraged, as I remember, to go get that training. Do your couple years of basic or whatever it is, and then come out and then be able to train with the guys. But I think further, we have to understand about on the way out, as Barb was talking about, when these guys are coming home, one thing that these groups like to do is, look, you were over there, and we've been doing this with military for it's just a historical thing. So doesn't matter who it is. So we go to Iraq to fight a war, it's the Iraqis who are the problem. We go to Vietnam, it's the Vietnamese who are the problem. So they've already got those racist ideas going on about that enemy. So we take it, and that's what these groups do. They'll stir that pot. They'll say, look, oh yeah, you hated those people. Well, they happen to be Muslim, mostly Muslim country. And then they'll feed into that, and they'll start trying to build. And these guys are super vulnerable. These guys coming back with PTSD, mental health, other mental health things. And these recruiters in these groups know that. They know that these guys are combat trained and seen a lot of stuff, and they're ready for violence too. So that's something they're playing on, and that's it's a really unfortunate measure. And I've seen lots of guys who come back and then end up getting involved in this. For instance, a guy who was involved in the military and then went off and did something really, really terrible was Wade Michael Page in Sikh Temple in Wisconsin, and that is a prime example of a person who was very lost after service and was very and was very involved in the movement, and if there were resources again for veterans, this might have been picked up on, and often it's just passed over as, oh, that's just something that they believed in when they were in there. They had to create a narrative so they could get through the time when they were over fighting or whatever. But that's it's a multifaceted issue, and I think we really need to do more to support our veterans when they come back, especially ones who have developed those narratives. And that's where I think some more programming and more reintegration, even similar to like prison reintegration programs, things like that. Those things we need to do better for helping folks that are like, what things do they have to do to reattach themselves in a positive way to society, right? And that's when these guys come back, they've had to in some cases build a narrative in their head in order to execute some of the violence that they took part in over there. And then when they come back, what are we doing to bring them back down? And that's that I've definitely heard that there's some whispers of work in this area coming up. So I'm happy to hear about those things, but I don't think we're doing enough right now in those areas and in supports, because those people are very vulnerable to becoming radicalized by the present groups that are around, right? So yeah.
Thank you very much. So that will end our formal session and Q&A and the formal presentation. So I'll just quickly wrap up what we all discussed today. And thank you so much for Professor Barbara Perry, just to let us know how the center is doing. And dear audience, please follow the research of the center. It has lifted, off quite a while, and it is doing some phenomenal research. You have heard some of it, and there's a web link I'll post shortly in the chat room. You can visit the recent research of the center, and it is one and a very unique research center to my knowledge in Canada. And this is doing a particular research on this hate, bias, and extremism. So please tune in with the research. Professor Barbara was here in Winnipeg actually in 2015, and I was one of the moderator of the session where she spoke about the Pulse nightclub shooting, if you remember, Professor. And it was a fascinating session, a whole day actually. And we listened to her presentation for two reasons that she was talking about. Remember, it's 2015, not yet the election in the South happened, but at that time she actually pointed out the change happening in the whole landscape of extremism and violence. And at that time, possibly many of us didn't take her comment seriously, of course, but it happened actually. And second point, she also shared on that particular seminar with the audience that how at the grassroots level the hate works, because she connected hate with the grievance. And we have heard from her as well as Brad today that real and perceived grievance are actually two of the very important aspects that we have to be cognizant about, because these are manipulated by the others and recruiters for violence. So in 2015 she spoke about these things, I clearly remember, in Winnipeg. And of course the center is doing, as I said, phenomenal works. Please tune in. Brad also spoke about number of important aspects like platforming and conspiracy theories and accelerationism. So this particular phenomena of accelerationism, I have difficulty pronouncing. I apologize, but it is quite complex, phenomenon. And dear audience, if you have time and energy, please shoot out emails, and I will send a request to Brad to explain. But there are a number of literatures you might find available. But be careful, as you have heard from both the panelists today, what you read and where from you read. So these are important aspects. And of course, education came time and again from both the panelists' ideas that this critical thinking and education and allowing our students, our young fellows, and of course the members of the armed forces and policing agencies, they need more education and more support. So these are all our panelists covered in this today's session, and we are very grateful for their insights and experience. And as a tradition again from Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, we request the panelists to have their last words before they leave, so that we also remember what they wanted to do or what they want to do in the future. So last words, Professor, then Brad.
Oh gosh, I wasn't expecting that. Well, I think I've started to boil down, the ways to intervene in terms of educate yourself and others, demand accountability from our leadership, and resist in whatever way you can, whether it's online or offline, with your voice or with your body. Resist the right where you can, safely.
Brad.
Yeah, I'll echo the sentiments of Dr. Perry there, and also I'll add that there are resources for people. So if you or have family members that are involved or find themselves radicalized, or there are now resources where there used to not be. Organizations like Life After Hate, the Organization for Prevention of Violence. There's organizations that are out there that are doing this work. So there's definitely there's for families. Also, educational resources. There, I know all across Ontario, I've worked with various agencies that are just doing some fantastic work, more specific, targeted work. And if people want to email me about those educational things, please let me know. I mean, some of it ranges from like online, work, like little webinars, like short. It's like little videos that they can use in their classrooms. Like there's little things that I get asked about, like what can I do just to do some training within my my department at places of employment, things like that. I mean, that's what it is. That if we can build awareness across platforms and places that we would not normally do, I mean that's one of the key things, and break our way into some of the places where the culture needs to change. And some of those places are law enforcement, some of those places are government, some of those places are even in universities where there's certain cultures and certain ways that we go about doing things. I think if we have a wider spread knowledge that these things do exist, these right-wing extremist groups and hate groups and all this stuff is existent in our community, it's about that buy-in, that we can work together. Like I was saying about the guys going off on the barge in World War II to go fight the Nazis. It's the same idea. We need to come together and stop dividing ourselves up, because the more divided we are, the less we're going to be, I think, facilitating actual change in this area, right? So, yeah, those are some of my last points.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Dear audience, we have heard from both the panelists their last words, and it is very important: education, education, and education. And Professor rightly mentioned, resist wherever you can with your power of knowledge. And this is what is important takeaway from this today's session. So once again, thank you very much, Professor Barbara Perry, Brad Galloway, and Dr. Hilal Mohiuddin to join and share your knowledge with the broader part of our population. And we thank you once again on behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada. Thank you. Stay well and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.